your side.
My name is Ever, and at 28, I thought I had carved out a life that was mine alone. I'm an anesthesiologist, my hands steady in the operating room, my mind a fortress of precision in the chaos of New York's top hospitals. To my family, I'm the golden child, the one who made it, the daughter they parade with pride at holiday gatherings and charity galas. But pride, I've learned, is a house of cards. And betrayal can topple it in a single breath. This is their story of how my world unraveled, and how I pieced it back together, not as the woman they wanted me to be, but as the woman I chose to become. It was a crisp October evening in 2025. The kind where the air smells of possibility and the city hums with ambition. I stood in the grand ballroom of a Manhattan restaurant, its chandeliers casting prisms of light across white tablecloths and polished silver. My engagement party. Liam, my fiancé, stood beside me, his hand warm against mine, his smile as solid as the skyscrapers he designed. At 34, he was an architect with a quiet charm, his dark hair flecked with early gray, his eyes carrying the weight of a past that included a messy divorce. I loved that about him. His imperfections made him real, a man who had weathered storms and come out stronger. We were perfect together, or so I believed, our lives interlocking like the beams of his buildings. The room buzzed with laughter and conversation. My colleagues from the hospital mingled with Liam's partners from his firm, their glasses clinking in toasts to our future. My stepmother, Helen, who had raised me since I was 10, glided through the crowd in a navy dress that hugged her frame, her smile radiant as she charmed everyone she met. She'd been my anchor after my mother's death, after my father's descent into a depression that left him a shadow of himself. Helen had stepped into our broken home, organized our chaos, and shaped me into the woman I was. I owed her everything, or so I'd been taught to believe. As the night wore on, Helen took the stage, her glass raised for a toast. To Eva and Liam, she began, her voice warm and commanding, the kind that could silence a room, a couple who proved that love can be both beautiful and strong. The crowd murmured in agreement, their smiles indulgent. But her speech didn't stop there. It veered into details that felt too intimate, too specific. She spoke of Liam's late-night sketches, his love for obscure jazz records, the way he'd once fixed her car in a rainstorm, his shirt clinging to him as he laughed under the downpour. I glanced at Liam, expecting a playful roll of his eyes, but his face was flushed, his smile tight, almost forced. The crowd chuckled, oblivious to the tension, but a cold knot formed in my stomach. Why did she know these things? Why was she speaking of him like he was hers? I brushed it off, or tried to. Helen was always like this, larger than life, always the center of attention. She thrived on being the perfect hostess, the perfect mother, the perfect everything. I told myself it was just her way, her need to shine. But as the party wound down, I saw them in the parking lot, standing too close, their heads bent together in a way that felt like a secret. Liam's hand brushed her arm, and she laughed, soft and familiar, a sound that pierced me. I stood by my car, my keys digging into my palm, my breath shallow. It's nothing, I told myself. You're imagining things. But the knot in my stomach tightened, and sleep didn't come that night. A week later, I was in Liam's apartment, borrowing his laptop to check my work schedule. He was in the shower, the hum of water a steady backdrop to the quiet morning. His email was open, a careless habit I'd always teased him about. I wasn't looking for anything, not really, but a subject line caught my eye. Miss you already. My heart stopped. I clicked, and the world tilted, a chain of emails between Liam and Helen, stretching back months, years, words that burned into my mind. I can't stop thinking about you. When can we be alone again? Eva doesn't suspect a thing. They had known each other before I met Liam. Their affair a quiet thread woven into the fabric of my life. It hadn't ended. It had never ended. I don't remember how I got to the bathroom, but I sank to the floor, the towels cold against my skin. I stayed there all night. My knees pulled to my chest, tears falling silently. I couldn't scream, couldn't call anyone, couldn't face the truth that the two people I trusted most had built a lie around me. Helen, who had brushed my hair and packed my lunches, who had told me I could be anything, Liam, who had promised me forever. I was a fool, a prop in their story, and the weight of it crushed me. I clutched the edge of the sink, staring at my reflection, but I didn't recognize the woman looking back. She was a stranger, hollowed out by betrayal. By morning, I was gone. I packed a bag, left a note for Liam that said only, "I know," and caught the first flight to Montana, where my father had lived before his death. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I turned off my phone, deleted my social media apps, and rented a small wooden cabin in the heart of a forest, where the only sounds were the rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. I needed silence, a place to disappear, a place to piece myself back together. The cabin was simpler, single room with a creaky bed, a wood stove, and a window overlooking pines that stretched into the sky. For days, I did nothing but stare at the trees, letting the betrayal sink in. I thought of my childhood, of my mother's death when I was 6, a car accident that left a hole in our family. My father never recovered, his grief a heavy fog that clung to our home. Helen came into our lives 4 years later, all warmth and efficiency, organizing our chaos. She was the perfect stepmother, or so it seemed, always pushing me to be better, to be perfect. But now, I saw her for what she was, a puppeteer, pulling strings to craft a family that served her image. I had been her masterpiece, the obedient daughter who never questioned her. I spent hours walking the forest trails, my boots crunching on pine needles, my mind unraveling memories I'd buried. I remembered the way Helen would critique my choices, my clothes, my friends, my dreams, always with a smile, always with a suggestion that felt like a command. I remembered how she'd steered me toward medicine, praising my grades, saying it was the only path that made sense. I'd wanted to be a writer once, to tell stories, to capture the world in words. But she'd laughed, called impractical, a childish fantasy. So I became a doctor, because it pleased her, because it made me someone she could show off. And now, I saw the cost of that obedience. 3 months into my solitude, I met Claire, a retired lawyer who lived in a cabin a mile away. She was in her 60s, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes sharp, but kind. She'd come to Montana after her own betrayal husband who'd left her for her best friend, over coffee on her porch. I poured out my story, the words spilling like water from a broken dam. I told her about Helen's control, Liam's lies, the way I'd let them shape me into someone I didn't recognize. Claire listened, her hands wrapped around her mug, her silence a gift. "You've been carrying their lies for too long," she said finally. "Write it down. Not for them, but for you. See what you've been too afraid to look at." So I wrote. At first, it was just fragments, memories, questions, flashes of anger. I sat at the cabin's wobbly table, a notebook open, my pen scratching out the pain of being shaped by someone else's hands. I wrote about the small betrayals, the comments that cut, the expectations that suffocated, and the big ones, like Helen and Liam's affair. I wrote about my mother, whose face I could barely remember, and my father, whose absence had left me vulnerable to Helen's control. The words were raw, unpolished, but they were mine. Clara's words echoed, and I started a blog, calling it The Invisible Betrayals. I wrote anonymously, pouring out the pain of being unseen, of loving people who saw me as a means to an end. I wrote about the way Helen had molded me, not out of love, but out of a need to create a perfect family image. I wrote about Liam, whose love had been a lie, a performance I'd fallen for. The blog was my confession, my rebellion, my way of reclaiming my voice. The blog found an audience, first a few readers, then hundreds, then thousands. People left comments, sharing their own stories of betrayal, of family secrets, of lives built on lies. I read everyone, feeling less alone with each word. For 6 months, I stayed anonymous, letting the blog be my voice in a world I wasn't ready to face. But one morning, as I watched the sunrise over the mountains, I realized I was tired of hiding. I wrote a final post, revealing my name, my story, my truth. I hit publish and held my breath. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in support, gratitude, even offers from publishers. Readers shared how my words had helped them face their own pain, their own betrayals. I cried reading some of them, not out of sadness, but out of a strange, fierce joy. I wasn't alone anymore. But there was one email I hadn't expected, from Helen. "Ever, I'm so sorry," she wrote. "I never meant to hurt you. Please, don't destroy our family's reputation. Let's talk." I read it and laughed. A bitter sound that echoed in the cabin. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry I'd spoken. Liam, I learned through mutual friends, was engaged again, moving on as if I'd never existed. I deleted Helen's email and didn't reply. A year after I'd left New York, I published my first book, The Invisible Betrayals. It wasn't just my story. It was a guide for others. A map through the pain of family betrayal, a testament to survival. I started speaking at conferences, sharing my journey, helping others find their voices. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't pretend to be, but I was free. I stood on the porch of my cabin one evening, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. The girl who had collapsed in that bathroom was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who knew her worth. Helen and Liam had tried to write my story, but I'd taken the pen, and as the stars appeared, one by one, I knew I'd never give it back. The years that followed were slow unfolding. I stayed in Montana, trading my cabin for a small house with a garden where I grew wildflowers, bright bursts of color that reminded me of the life I was building. I painted, wrote, and spoke. My days filled with purpose. My book became a touchstone for others, and I received letters from readers who said my words had helped them heal. I kept each one in a wooden box, a reminder that pain could become purpose. Helen tried to reach out again, sending emails that grew increasingly desperate. "We can fix this," she wrote once. "You're still family." I didn't respond. I didn't hate her. I just didn't need her anymore. Liam faded into the background, a footnote in my story. I heard he'd married his new fiancée, a socialite who fit his world better than I ever had. I wished them well, not out of kindness, but because I no longer cared enough to feel otherwise. My father's memory lingered, softer now. I forgave him for the years he couldn't be there, for the way his grief had left me open to Helen's control. I forgave myself, too, for the years I'd let others define me. I started writing again, not just for the blog, but for myself. Poems, stories, fragments of a life I was still discovering. I painted, too, filling canvases with the colors of Montana's mountains, its rivers, its endless skies. Clara remained a friend, a mentor, a mirror who showed me what resilience looked like. We'd sit on her porch, sipping tea, talking about life, love, and the courage to start over. "You're not invisible anymore," she said one day, her eyes crinkling with a smile. I nodded, feeling the truth of it in my bones. I was Eva, and I was enough. One evening, I received an invitation to speak at a conference in Seattle, a gathering of survivors of family trauma. I stood on the stage, my hands steady, my voice clear, and told my story. The audience listened, their faces a mix of pain and hope. And when I finished, they stood, clapping, some with tears in their eyes. I didn't feel like a hero, but I felt alive, connected to something bigger than myself. After the conference, I walked along the waterfront, the city lights reflecting on the water. I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who had stood in that glittering ballroom, believing she had it all. She was still part of me, but she wasn't all of me. I'd spent so long living in the shadow of others' expectations. But shadows only exist where there's light, and I was finally ready to step into my own. As I stood there, the wind cool against my face, I knew this was just the beginning. My story wasn't finished. and neither was I had taken the pen. And I would keep writing, one word, one day, one truth at a time.